an outlier. So let's answer. What is an outlier? What is an outlier? Anybody know? Anybody know what an outlier is? We looked at a table, right? Sure. We looked at the table on the slide, and we said that it was. We were trying to figure out what the outliers were from the table. Right? You guys made a list of outliers, right? Look at this big long table you can see on the Prezi slide. Right? It's on your paper. Right? What's an outlier?
A point that stands out.
A point that stands out. Okay. Some of you said you use this graph. I would say the graph itself is a lot easier to figure out outliers from. The graph is a lot more helpful than the table. I will give you that. Okay. On the graph, how'd you find an outlier? If I have these data points on here, which ones are outliers? Which ones are outliers? The ones that stand out. The ones that are in different color? The ones that are away from all points. Good. The ones that are kind of by themselves, right? Like these two are kind of by themselves, right? Those two are by themselves. By themselves from what?
The rest of the points.
The rest of the points. This middle section, right? Okay. The trend. Okay. A trend can be shown with a what? Into the sea.
Coral. Cloud.
A cloud. Good. Right? You could draw a cloud around this middle set, couldn't you? Sure. That cloud would show what type of relationship?
Linear.
Linear, because it would be a narrow. Oval. I knew I would have something. Yeah. If I draw a cloud around this data set, the middle part of it, okay, we get a narrow oval, right? Which means it is a linear relationship that is what?
Positive.
Positive and
Strong.
strong. Now, if I drew a cloud around every data point, strong or weak?
Moderate.
Okay, maybe moderate. I'd say almost more on the weekend because it's kind of round, right? It's almost a circle, isn't it? Okay, but it could be moderate or weak. I'd accept either one of those two, right? So drawing a cloud around all the points might not be helpful, but drawing a point around that middle part where the trend is, that might be helpful. So what's an outlier? It's something that is what? Not easily included in the graph.
Something that can't be included in the cloud.
So they can't be included in the cloud? Okay. So it's something that can't be or isn't? Isn't. Okay, so it's not like we're excluding these points. Right? They're just not in that cloud, are they? Right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So an outlier is something that is outside of the cloud. Right? The cloud contains most of the data, doesn't it? Okay. Wikipedia. Let's see if I.
You can't trust Wikipedia.
We had a hard. Oh my goodness! I moved my thing. All right, Wikipedia. I know you can't trust Wikipedia, but usually for definitions like outlier, it's pretty accurate. Wikipedia says the outlier is a statistical measure. An outlier is an observed point that is distant from the other observed points. Okay, so that means it is a data point that's distant from the other data points, right? Well, looking at our graph. Oh, and it zoomed. Come on now. Come on, Prezi. Got it. Skills right there. Okay. So, an outlier is a point that's distant from the other points, right? Right? So, those points would be the ones that are outside of the cloud. Okay. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's define an outlier. We can say an outlier. I define an outlier as a point that lies outside or away from the majority of the data points. Okay? It's a point that lies outside or away from a majority of the data points. So it's a point that lies outside or away from a majority of the data points. Right? Do you guys like the definition? No? Sure?
Too many words.
We'll see. So here we have some outliers, right? Right? Is this one an outlier?
Mhm.
Is that one an outlier? Is that one an outlier? Or the one up here? Those are outliers, right? Because they're outside or away from majority of data points. Now the majority of the data points are inside the cloud, right? They're inside the cloud. So it says majority of the data points, maybe we want to write in parentheses behind that cloud. Okay. I've also heard it referred to before as a cluster. Okay. A cloud or a cluster. Okay. I'll probably use those words interchangeably. Does anyone know how many types of data points there are? 4. 4! I did not, Josh. You smart guy. Okay. There are 4 types of data points. Does anyone know what they are?
Isn't it the linear?
Nope. 4 types.
Banana?
Nope. Look right below your graph on your note page.
X only, Y only, X and Y considered jointly.
So we have X only, Y only, then we have X and Y considered jointly. Okay. Let's talk about X only first. An X only outlier. Okay. Looking at our graph. I think I want to zoom in just a little bit. If I don't mess Prezi up too bad. Gotta go dim. Just a little. Did I get them all? Okay. Alright, so I get all the points. Alright, so there's all the points. I know we lost the axes. Let me pull that back on. So there's our axes. Our axis is back. We have all the points. Okay. I'll redraw my cloud. Right. Why did I erase it? I zoomed in, so my points don't fit inside my cloud anymore. Okay. So, an X-only outlier is what? An X-only outlier is what? You want to take a guess? Just a bit, Josh.
One that's closer to the X.
Closer to the X line? Okay. An X-only outlier is an outlier that's outside of the data because of which value?
X.
The X value. Because of its horizontal axis value. Okay. So what's a point on here that's outside of the data because of the horizontal axis value, because of its X value?
The 210?
The 210 one, right? This guy way up here. But is that just the X value that brings that one out? No, because that also has a really big Y value too, doesn't it? Person's got big feet. 115, size 15 shoe.
The 200?
The 200. So this one right here. Right? The X value has taken that point outside of the cloud. You guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe on your notes you want to circle that point, right? What should we write next to it?
X.
X. Because that one is an X-only outlier. Are there any other X-only outliers? How is that one X-only?
180.
180. Where's 180?
The right there, the middle right there.
180?
Yeah.
Right here's an X-only?
And then the one underneath it.
That one?
Yeah.
Let's say those are X-onlys. Okay. Josh says, why is this an X-only outlier? Guys, this is an X-only outlier because its X value puts it outside of the cloud. Just its X value. So this one's Y value. Would its Y value still be inside the cloud? Yeah. Okay. Would this one's Y value still be inside the cloud? No, this y value is outside the cloud, isn't it? So because the cloud ends right here. Right, this y value is too low. My y value is like 5.5.
But the x would still be.
The x would still be, so this is a different type of outlier. We'll get to that one in a second. Is there any other x only outlier? Good, this one. That's an x only outlier. So an x only outlier is an outlier that is an outlier because the x value. Right? We can write it this way. Only the x value is outside the cloud. Or the x value is responsible for it being outside the cloud. So only the x value is outside the cloud. Someone last hour said it this way. If I want to put this point in the cloud, do I have to change the x value or the y value? We have to change the x value, right? I have to slide it to the right, don't I? It's changing the x value, isn't it? So that makes it an x only outlier. Okay? Does that make sense? I can move this one up and down all I want. It won't end up in the cloud. If I slide it horizontally to the right, it'll end up in the cloud.
Well, that one.
Same thing here.
Oh, never
If I slide it horizontally to the left, it'll end up in the cloud. Now this one, I can move it up or backwards. That's a special type. We'll get to that in a second. This one, someone said this was an x only. I can move that one left and right all I want. Will it ever end up in the cloud?
No.
No. This one I have to move which way?
Up.
Up. So that means it's a
Y.
y only outlier. So a y only outlier is an outlier because only the y value is outside the cloud. So maybe I want to circle this one and call it a y only. You want to circle this? Well, I shouldn't give it away. Gosh. Stupid Mr. Branch. Are there any other y only outliers?
That one.
Which one?
The one you were just one.
Oh, that's just one circle. Okay. That one's also y only outlier. Okay. Because if I were to move this point up, it'd be in the cluster. If I move it left and right all I want, never will be inside the cluster. If I move this one down, it'll be in the cluster, right? Or the cloud. If you move it left and right all I want, won't be in there. Right? When I move it down, it will. So it's a y only outlier. The y value is what's pulling it away from the cloud. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. I know some people are bringing up, well, what about this one? Right? What about that one? Well, these ones, we can move them both, either horizontally or vertically. Horizontally or vertically. That's a different type of outlier. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. So what were those points? So what were our x-only outliers? We had 200 comma what? 11 and 145 comma 8. Right? So those are some x-only outliers. Y-only outliers. What were our points? 180, 5.5, and 166, 14. Okay. Now, so you might still be struggling with this. We'll talk about it right now. Okay. Let's look at the x-only outliers. The x value pulls them outside, right? I'll put a little mark right here. Everything inside my cloud is in between 11.5 and 7.5. Do you guys agree with that? Right? Okay. Everything inside my cloud here is between 155 and like 194, 193, somewhere in there. Right? Does that make sense? So for the x-only outliers, 11 and 8 are between 7.5 and 11.5, right? Right? 11 and 8 fall inside this range, don't they? Right? 200 and 145 fall outside that range. That means they're x-only. Okay? Same thing the y-onlys. Their x coordinates are inside the cloud. Their y coordinates are not. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? Do we all have this written down? Because there's two more up here, and I want to write them right here. I think it's a great spot for them. We all got this written down?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. The blue part?
I have a question.
What's that?
Why isn't that point that's right above from that, why isn't that right there? Yeah, why isn't that part of the cluster?
Why isn't it part of the cluster?
It's about there.
It's almost there, right? Okay. And I was being very stingy with my cloud for a reason, because this point's going to be a special type of outlier that we'll get to in a second. Okay. Good question. Okay. And what type of outlier that one is, Faith, is the hardest one to identify. Okay. We good? Okay. So the other types of outliers. So we had x only and y only, and now we have outliers because of x and y, right? And x and y considered jointly, right? So it's an outlier of both x and y. What's one of these values that might be an outlier for both x and y?
144.
144? 144 what?
No, I'm saying 140 is.
Oh, 140 comma 4. Gotcha. So this one, why might that one be both an x and y outlier?
Because we need both to get there.
I can move it left and right all I want, won't end up in the cloud, right? I can move it up and down all I want, won't end up in the cloud, right? I need to move it to the right and up. So both the x value and y value are
Needed.
too small in this case, aren't they? Right? They both need to change, don't they? They're both too small. Any other x and y outlier? Any other x and y outlier?
Wait, isn't that one the 11.5 one right there? The one right above like the cluster.
Right there?
Yeah.
That's an x and y only?
No, but I'm saying like isn't that one a y? Because it just needs y to get into the little group.
I could move y, but I could also move x.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to that in a second.
But your circle is just too big.
We'll get to that in a second. I drew it a little big just on purpose, so I can use that point as an example. Well, that's a subjective thing, right? A little bit subjective. But there's a general trend we can notice.
That 210, 15.
This one is also x and y, right? Because 210, move it up and down all I want, won't be in the cluster. You move left and right all I want, won't be in the cluster, right? But if I move it on a diagonal, meaning I'm going both left and down, right? Then it'll be inside the cluster, won't it? So that's an x and y outlier. So it's an x and y outlier, right? If the x value
It's too.
and the y value is outside of the cloud. So x and y outliers mean the x value and y value are outside the cloud. And what were our two examples here? 144 or 140, comma 4. We did it again, right, Faith? Okay. And what was the other one?
210, 15.
210, 15. Does that make sense? Last ones. X and Y jointly. Toughest ones to identify because they are the closest to the cloud. Okay. So the ones that are X and Y jointly, that one and that one. Okay. The last two outliers are going to talk about, right? The last 2 points that are outside our cloud. We're going to write a J by these for jointly. Okay. Now the way the x and y jointly outlier works, okay, is it's an outlier where both the x and y value are inside the cluster. But when we put the two together, when we put the combination together, it's outside of the cluster. So for example, this person has a size 8 shoe, right? 8 shoe is inside the cluster, isn't it? But for their age, which is about 160 months or 180 months, right? That's a small foot, right? So 180, 8 is outside of that cluster. Does that make sense? Just like this person, size 11.5. That'd fit in here, wouldn't it? You're going to be on the tip of our cloud, but it'd fit in there, right?
Mhm.
If I move this point right here, it wouldn't be an outlier. It'd be right in the cloud, wouldn't it? Right? It'd be the biggest point in the cloud, but it'd still be there. But for the number of months, 165 months, 11.5 size shoe is kind of big. Right? So the combination pulls it out of the cloud. Does that make sense? So this person isn't too old or too young, right? They fit inside the age range, but they just have a big foot. Just like this person isn't too old or too young, but inside the age range they have a small foot. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Now this is not actual data. I made it up, so don't feel bad. I'm not saying you have big feet or small feet. Is any of you? Okay. I just made the data up to fit the model or fit the example. So x and y jointly means the x value and y value are inside the cluster or cloud. Okay. But when we put them together, the point is outside the cloud. Okay. But when we consider them jointly, it's outside the cloud. We consider the values jointly, and that's why it's called jointly considered outlier. X and Y jointly. When we consider the values jointly, the point is outside the cloud. Most difficult one to address. And if we use your predictions from earlier, where you guys looked at the list and said, oh, this number's too big for this list, it's an outlier. This number's too small for that list, it's an outlier, right? We looked at the black and the blue list, right? You guys remember that? Right? It was easy to find x only, y only, in both x and y, right? The jointly ones, which we did find in our list at the beginning, are more difficult to find because they're hidden inside the list, right? The number doesn't look too big for the x's. The number doesn't look too big for the y's. But when I put them together, the point's not inside the cluster. All right, so here we have 165, comma 11.5, right? And what's the other one?
188.
180, comma 8. I learned. Okay. Those are our two jointly considered outliers. Does this make sense? Now, how many of you have played tic-tac-toe before? Okay, a lot of us have played tic-tac-toe, right? Now, if I'm going to draw a tic-tac-toe board, I do one of these things, right? Now, that board's pretty symmetric. It's the same on both sides, right? Same on top and bottom. If I draw a tic-tac-toe board on my graph, then I can make it really easy to find my outliers. Okay. So, what do I mean by that? These tick marks represent the bottom y and the top y for my cloud, don't they? So if I draw a line, I'm actually going to draw a line just a little bit above 11.5. Okay. We're drawing a line a little bit above 11.5. All right. My cloud's in below that line, right? Right. If I draw my line, if I draw a line right here, my whole cloud's above that line, right? So that means everything above this has too big of a y value, doesn't it? Y only, x and y, right? Everything below it has too small of a y value, right? These are both some kind of y outlier, aren't they? Those are both some kind of Y outlier, right? That's half my tic-tac-toe board. Where's the other part of my tic-tac-toe board go? I draw a vertical line that encloses my cloud here, right? So now these have too small of x values, don't they? And I draw a vertical line that encloses my cloud here. Now these x's are too big. And everything in the center square, the most coveted square on a tic-tac-toe board, right? Everything in the center square, except for these two guys, are inside my cloud, right? You guys see that? Okay. Now, based on their location on a tic-tac-toe board, okay, that is a specific term, tic-tac-toe board. Okay, I made this up. But every specific square on a tic-tac-toe board is a specific type of outlier. What outlier will exist here? Only?
Both.
Can a Y outlier be here?
Yeah.
No, a Y outlier can't be here. Okay? Only X outliers will be in this region. Because the X values are too small, right? The Y values are fine, right? The Y values are inside my cloud, but the X values are too small. Does that make sense? Where are the X values too big? So this is to the left, so the X value is too big, or to the right. So right to the right of the center. Those are only X outliers. Any other specific spots you know? Any other specific type of outliers? So this is a map. Where are the Y outliers, Josh? Top and bottom. So here the X's are okay, the Y's are too big, right? So my Y only outliers will be up here. And here the Y's are too small. So they'll also be right there. Right? Any other regions we know what the outlier will be? Where's an X and Y outlier, Bruno? Top right corner? So this is an X and Y outlier, right? Where else? Bottom left. So here the X's and Y's are too small, right? Here the X's and Y's are too big. Forgot to shut off my screensaver. Any other locations though? Okay, the other two corners, right? This corner we have a small x but a big y. This will also be an x and y, right? Down here we have a big X and small y, perfect. So that's also an X and Y. So what we made here is a map for where the outliers exist, right? Okay. Does that make sense? Where are the jointly ones? Are they with the cluster or outside the cluster?
Still outside the little.
So the jointly considered ones are the ones that are inside the middle but are not inside the cloud. So if they're in the middle but they're not inside the cloud, that's where the jointly X and Y will live.
We have to draw the cluster before we
Yep, you need to draw the cluster first. Okay. So what we've created here, guys, is something that takes the subjective and makes it a little bit more objective. Okay? Because I've drawn a map for where the outliers exist, haven't I? Right? This tic-tac-toe board thing works every single time. All right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. All right. So if I was going to start with the tic-tac-toe board, I know we didn't start with that, but I think starting with the tic-tac-toe board is the best way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this real quick. I do not want you to erase yours. Okay? We'll nail them together again just for a little more practice. All right? So here's my data set, all back to normal, no outliers identified, right? If I'm going to draw my tic-tac-toe board to start classifying outliers, the first thing I'm going to do is draw the cloud. I'm going to draw a cloud. I'm going to be very stingy about my cloud. Oh, I missed that point this time. Okay? Be as stingy as I can about my cloud. All right? Try to be close to the points as possible. Try to identify a main cluster. And there are situations where there will be no outliers too. That's possible too. you have a really weak correlation, there might be no outliers. That's okay. Right? So I'm going to draw my cloud. Then what am I going to do?
Label the outliers.
Nope, we're not going to label the outliers. We're going to draw the tic-tac-toe board. Okay? I'm going to draw my bottom line just below the cloud. Right? I'm going to draw my first top line just above the cloud. Okay? Got half my board in place, right? Then I'm going to draw a vertical line just to the left of the cloud. I'm going to draw another vertical line just to the right of the cloud. And now what I've created is a map for where the outliers exist. Okay? Who lives here?
X and Y.
X and Y. What about here?
X only.
X only. What about here?
X and Y.
X and Y. Good. What about here?
Y only.
Y. What about here?
Y.
Y. Then inside here,
Jointly.
right? Those are our jointly considered outliers. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? Yeah, what's that?
Like, what if people aren't that specific with the cluster? What if they accidentally put that other joint one in there? That would be the problem.
This would be one that I might grade where I'm going to look at your specific graph. Okay, it's kind of like showing your work. If you show me your work, then it'll make more sense for me. Okay? Anything else? All right, you need to bring that worksheet back with you tomorrow.